Boom shakalaka, we're back for another episode of Live with Littlewood in front of our live studio audience here in Westminster. Tonight we're going to be discussing how do we avoid the fiscal apocalypse and the climate apocalypse. Two pretty easy issues for my stellar panel of guests to resolve in the next hour. Kaboom, kapow, welcome to this evening's Live with Littlewood with me, Mark Littlewood, Director General at the Institute of Economic Affairs. Thanks for joining us. We've got one hell of a lot to get through on this programme on Budget Day. If you're enjoying the show, always remember to hit that thumbs up, like button, hit the subscribe button and the notification bell to make sure you never miss anything. And if you're feeling flush after today's budget, or if you've just got a few quid spare, please do consider becoming an IEA online patron. Details are in the chat notes below. We now have a live studio audience for Live with Littlewood every 2 weeks, and if you want to be a part of that, you need to become an IEA online patron. It only costs from a £5 a month. Should be easy for you to afford that, especially if you're a beer drinker after the budget today, because you'll be saving a fair few quid. Later in the show, I'll be asking our very own Dr. Kristian Niemietz, Head of Political Economy here at the IEA, whether the budget and COP26 will be making the gradual drift of the young towards socialism even worse. We'll also be joined by Bishop Auckland MP Dehenna Davison. She'll be telling us what she thinks of the government's carbon net zero agenda. And from our friends at the Centre for Policy Studies, their Head of Energy and Environment, Eamonn Ives, will be joining us. And I'm going to be putting to him whether there's a free market solution to climate change. But first up, great pleasure to welcome face to face back onto the show, Talk Radio's presenter, Mike Graham. Mike, great to have you with us. Good to have you, my friend. Have a seat.
Thank you.
We've got you what is now a more expensive glass of rosé. I'm on the cheaper beer.
Prosecco's got cheaper as well, isn't it?
Prosecco's got cheaper. You're a wine man, though, aren't you, mainly?
I'll drink pretty much anything you give me.
Oh, right, okay. But I'm not very price sensitive then, right? You're not going to be trying, right? So, Mike, what do we make of the budget? The Chancellor's rattled off, I mean, we've seen it, most of it in the papers over the last few days, 35 billion quid more in additional spending, jacked up the minimum wage by more than 6%, that's twice present consumer inflation, lifting the public sector pay freeze, God only knows what public sector workers are going to get, yet more money for the NHS, proudly boasting it's now rising to 177 billion. You'd think the Treasury was absolutely awash with cash,
Wouldn't you? I mean, I find myself completely and utterly unmoved by all of it, really, because one, most of it was telegraphed anyway, so we kind of knew what was happening. Two, it's such a bizarre scene now, watching all these Tories who've all decided, good idea to put some masks on, just in case we have to ask everybody else to do it. And you kind of go, what are you doing? Why are you wearing masks suddenly? You weren't last week.
Really understated then, Mike, on that.
I mean, what's the point of giving them more money? They can't use the money they've got, right? I discovered this thing called the NHS Confederation last week, when they decided to start telling us we should all be wearing masks and hiding from each other and working from home again. And it turns out that it's run by some Blairite who used to be Tony Blair's advisor, a guy called Matthew Taylor.
Oh, yeah.
He's up 250 grand a year. They've got a £15 million budget, and their entire purpose in life is to procure more money for the NHS, and that's all they do. And I'm going, really? Is that why we... So they all get a pay rise? Matthew Taylor getting his...
Well, I guess he's hit his target, right?
Well, I guess he has. So, I mean, it's all kind of washed over me as though it doesn't really matter. I'm becoming more and more completely and utterly kind of detached from the government.
Yeah.
In any way, shape or form.
So, I mean, what do you put it down to, Mike, that the government just can't get off, not just on the NHS, the spending treadmill anywhere, really? Right. I mean, it just seems to be, they're going around, they consider it to be a virility symbol to say, oh, we're going to spend, I think, 7 billion on local infrastructure and 500 million quid on football pitches. It's just this endless sort of rollout of cash that they're going to spend. I mean, you can't imagine
how that's going to be given to local councils and how it's going to be squandered by local councils. I mean, the people that can't even organise bin collections, you're going to give them, 2 billion to build some football pitches. I mean, why? Nobody's interested in playing football anymore unless they're playing for, Manchester United. Nobody plays local football anymore because there's no money in it. Yeah. So it all seems to be a bit of a waste of time for me. And I think Rishi Sunak is just kind of treading water until Boris falls over and he gets his job.
Well, that might be the way it goes. Sunak's had to do you think the truth of the matter is it's the Prime Minister who's the big spender? Rishi would like to rein him in a bit, but how do you manage that?
I don't even think it's that. I think we've now reached kind of peak idiot government where basically nobody's really running it. You know, Carrie's running about telling Boris what to say and what to do. And I mean, he actually said the other day, without even laughing, that maybe we should start feeding humans to the animals. And people just went, yeah, well, it's Boris, isn't it?
Just another idea to put on the table.
Yeah, exactly. And he's telling kids that, they've got to save the climate, they've got to do this, they've got to do that. He wants everybody to buy, a £10,000 to £15,000 new version of a boiler.
Yeah.
What does he think people have got knocking around in the back of the house? 15 grand, oh yeah, just buy another boiler. Buy an electric car. He's completely detached from reality.
Maybe Matthew Taylor will move to the Boiler Confederation to crack this one.
Yeah. So I find that, there's literally no Conservatives left in the Conservative Party. They don't seem to understand that Conservatives are supposed to be low tax, they're supposed to be not big on public spending. They're doing everything wrong.
Yeah, it's extraordinary, isn't it?
It really is.
When you're hearing from your listeners, right, on Talk Radio, in the independent republic of Mike Graham, do you think the appetite out there amongst ordinary folk is for more public spending of the Conservatives?
No.
Or do you think they actually want their taxes down?
They want their taxes down. People mostly now are worried about their energy bills and how much money they're having to spend just to, keep the actual heating on, because it's cost. For most people now, their bills are double what they were even at the start of this year. It's not sustainable for most people. And the government seem to be doing nothing about it. All they're doing is saying, well, thank God we've got a cap. And you go, I thought a cap was supposed to keep the prices down. Doesn't seem to be working that way. Yeah. And they don't seem to have a care in the world about the way that people actually want to have their own money, spend it in the way that they wish to spend it, not have it taken off them to feed some ridiculous green campaign that they're running. And I just think they've lost the plot altogether.
And surely the route back for them would be to try and find the room to make some meaningful tax cuts, right? Yeah. I'm rather like you. It kind of, I'll probably get fired for saying this because I'm supposed to be fascinated about all economic statistics, but it rather washed over me as well. And you get all of this unbelievable technical detail and no sort of broad brush commitment really to lower taxes. No. A couple of decent changes, but nothing particularly substantial. And it does seem that if Sunak's got, let's say, 10 quid to play with, then 9 quid goes on spending and maybe £1 goes on tax cuts. Right. So you should flip that on its head, shouldn't
exactly right. And the whole point about the business of business is that you need to encourage it to continue. You don't need to disencourage it and sort of put measures on every single business in the world that it becomes more expensive to operate because you're not green enough. Or if you don't go green, we'll have to tax you some more. It just seems to me that there's nobody in control of the tiller. And there's certainly no vision, it seems to me, and there's certainly no kind of ideology at all. They seem to have lost all. They're making David Cameron look like an ideologue.
Yeah. And that takes some doing. That takes some doing. Yeah. But here is the good news. Now, I don't know if you really believe the stats, Mike. I'm a bit sceptical about official government statistics. But really? If you were to believe the statistics, we are going to, basically by Christmas, have completely recovered all of the economic lost ground from, so we'll be back to where we were in February 2020 by Christmas. I think huge if true. Doesn't that speak to incredible resilience in the private sector? I thought it could take years to bounce back.
It really does. When you see Tesco's reporting that they've made absolutely record profits in the first half of this year, you start to think, well, actually, people are still spending money. They've still got money. They haven't been able to spend it on holidays, maybe they haven't bought another car. And the people who do have money in this country have done okay. But there's an awful lot of people who don't have anything.
Sure.
And an awful lot of people who have no education, no hope, no kind of, likelihood of becoming employed. And they don't really seem to have any clue about that. This levelling up campaign, I don't even know what it means.
Yeah, I hope you could tell me what it meant. I can't get my head around it.
I wish I did. They keep mentioning the north of England as if the north of England is some foreign country that nobody's ever been to, where they all have whippets and, drink beer and wear flat caps. And they're kind of like, well, actually, that's not really what the north is like. There's parts of the north that are doing really well, parts of the south which are doing really badly. Yeah. The parts of southeast England where you cannot literally get from point A to point B unless you've got a car. There is no public transport. They don't know anything about that.
But you got any sympathy with what they're trying to do? I can't remember, again, the whole list of blooming schemes, but aren't they sort of building, transport infrastructure and super fast broadband or
look
whatever?
At what they're doing. They're building HS2, which seems to be running to the rails. I mean, there's nothing going on there. Crossrail seems to have stalled. I'm not even sure anybody wants to go on it anymore.
Yeah.
Because all the people that work in London want to work from home. So they don't care about getting from one side of London to the other anymore. The roads are absolutely buggered. You can't get anywhere. The cycling superhighway seems to be the only thing that Sadiq Khan cares about. I just find it extraordinary that they just let it all kind of wash over them without seemingly having a clue about what to do. I mean, if you went to Boris Johnson today and said, what are you doing tomorrow? I don't think he knows.
Mm-hmm. Just live in 1 hour to the next.
Ask Carrie. What are we doing? What's in the diary?
And, but
making another baby? I know, you're still pregnant,
so we're just going to limp on, aren't we? I mean, it's amazing there's a thriving private sector at all in Britain, isn't it?
I think like you, I just kind of detach myself from it and I go, well, we'll just get on and do what we do. It's a bit like what we did in America when I was in America and Ronald Reagan was president. It was great because nobody bothered you. Mm-hmm. You made your money, you paid your tax, you moved on, you expanded, you hired people, you fired people, and the economy worked very well. Here, it seems like you have to ask permission to do everything. Mm-hmm. If you want to exchange a car, you have to talk to somebody. If you have to get involved with the DVLA to get, an HGV licence, it's all kind of run into the dust.
So we're spending all of our time complying rather than producing. Is the underlying problem, and that kind of puts a damper on growth.
They've become very fond of that. They love the idea of you filling out forms for everything. Even going to party conference, which I didn't go to, thankfully. You have to fill out a myriad of forms to make sure you are who you say you are, and you've had this test or that test. Even if they don't ask you for it, they want you to fill the form out anyway.
I did go to a Conservative Party conference.
You did,
and
you were on the radio.
And
I seem to remember.
And yeah, blimey! I mean, it was a queue a mile long to pick up your pass. Well, they couldn't just send it to you. It was like Soviet Union style queuing.
Well, I was going to say, it looked more like a Saudi arms fair than a party conference. People sort of plying their wares. Do you fancy buying some of this?
And well, the thing what I thought was quite Soviet as well was that the party commissars jumped the queue, right? So we just had to stay in line. But if you're one of the top brass of the party, jump the queue.
It's now being run like a sort of Rolling Stones tour, isn't it? If you're in with the band, you get the special backstage pass, and then there's another backstage pass for the inside of the backstage area, and it's all about who you know and whether you're in favour or not. And unfortunately, again, it goes back to Carrie. It's all her friends.
Right.
If you're friends with her, you're all right.
But here you go. Let's assume that they have that the government, the Conservative Party, has some basic instinct for electoral survival. Then, if you're right and your listeners are typical of real Britain, which I think they probably are.
Well, they're certainly typical of a very big part of real Britain.
Then you would think, wouldn't, just in their own narrow self-interest, that they would go for a more pro-enterprise, lower tax agenda, just, even if they don't believe in it, just as the rational way of harvesting votes, no?
But I guess there are people presumably still telling them that you can't do that yet because we haven't got the money. And we actually need to, it's a bit of a facade, I think, to tell people that, well, we've got all this debt. It doesn't mean anything to anyone. You can be in trillions of pounds of debt and people don't really understand what that means. It doesn't affect them particularly. Nobody's taking money out of your pocket specifically to pay off the debt. They might be paying the NHS, which is different. But also, I think the trouble is that they've got this kind of mentality that they know how right they are, and there isn't really any opposition, so they can carry on. I think what's really interesting is this YouGov poll that came out today about the net zero referendum.
Oh yeah, well, what's it said? I haven't seen that.
I'm jumping all over that.
Right.
There's about 58% of people, if you take out the don't knows, who would like to have a referendum on net zero.
And
because most of the people in this country don't want net zero.
And is that just they want a referendum? We know how they'd vote if there was one.
Most of the people who want the referendum are from the red wall seats, Brexit voting, working class people, who basically will say, no, we can't afford a heat pump. We can't afford a Tesla, unfortunately. We haven't got enough money to feed the kids. And actually, this whole net zero, you hear it all the time now from people. Well, in order to meet net zero, that we've, told everybody that's what we're going to do. Well, why?
Yeah.
Well, why are you doing it? Nobody actually said that's what we wanted.
So do you think we're going to get a referendum? I saw Steve Baker on the BBC earlier pushing for this, and John McDonnell was just sort of saying, no, we haven't got time for that, it's an emergency now. But Steve Baker seemed pretty attracted to the idea of a referendum.
The more they say we haven't got time, it's an emergency, it's not an emergency. We know it's not an emergency, absolutely not. David Attenborough is probably going to die before the Earth is, let's put it that way. And in the end of the day, it's all nonsense. It's all chasing this ridiculous kind of, we must get to net zero. Why? I just, and I think that probably they won't want to. I had Robert Jenrick on this morning, and I put it to him that there was a lot of people wanting, and he said, well, I don't think we should have any more referendums. And I went, oh really? I thought you might say that. But you know, if the pressure builds, it could become a bit of a movement. And I think what we need in this country politically is a bit of a movement, something that people can unite behind. You know, it's not lockdown anymore, because I don't think we're going to have that. And it's not European Union anymore. But I think maybe this net zero, because a lot of people are fed up being told they're not green enough, and they're going to be taxed more, and they're going to be told that there are only certain things that you can buy. You know, Jonah Lumley saying you have to, ration your food.
Bring back rationing, yeah.
I mean,
the
really?
war spirit, yeah.
It's madness.
That was pretty mad. Well, look, I've got something I can cheer you up on from the Chancellor's speech today. It might seem that it's the sort of more leftist, statist groups that got the Chancellor's ear, or perhaps Carrie, or Green groups, but very proud to say the Institute of Economic Affairs did actually get a shout out in his speech, and in one area that's very close to my heart, or more accurate to say close to my liver, he does actually seem to have moved policy in an IEA direction. Let's watch a short clip of what Rishi Sunak said now.
Business and build a stronger economy. Madam Deputy Speaker, let me turn now to alcohol duties. First introduced in 1643 to help pay for the Civil War, our alcohol duty system is outdated, complex, and full of historical anomalies. The Institute of Fiscal Studies have called it, in their words, a mess. The Institute of Economic Affairs said it defies common sense. And the World Health Organization have warned that countries like the EU, UK, which follow the EU rules, are, and I quote, unable to implement tax systems that are optimal from the perspective of public health. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, today we are taking advantage of leaving the EU to announce the most radical simplification of alcohol duties for over 140 years. We are taking 5 steps today to create a system that is simpler, fairer, and healthier.
So maybe a little bit of good news in the budget, just something to hold on to, and to try and cheer us up is the ever upbeat, smiley and enthusiastic head of political economy here at the IEA, Dr. Kristian Niemietz. Kristian. Thanks for joining us. Kristian. So this is on the simplification of alcohol duty. Our good friend Chris Snowdon's played a blinder, hasn't he? The Chancellor has moved things very much in our direction. Simplified system, 5 bands of alcohol tax, not 16. I think, Mike's Rosé is going to get a bit more expensive, but our beer is going to get a bit cheaper. Prosecco is going to get a bit cheaper. I mean, am I really just, clinging on to pretty small fry here, or is this a good move in the right direction?
Yes, that was the best part of the budget. I like it so far. This was, although we have to say, even though there is a simplification in that the number of levies is going to be reduced, they're also at the same time making it more complicated by introducing a special rate firstly for draft beer and then another special rate for, what was it, I think?
Cider of some sort?
Low strength,
right.
Small breweries, that was it. So rather than just going by alcohol content, they now go also by the size of the brewery, and in that way, of course, they're making it more complicated.
So some bureaucrat comes around your brewery with a measuring tape to decide whether you're
and you
small,
wonder
medium,
who
or
comes
large.
up with this stuff. You sit in a lot of meetings. We all sat in meetings before, and you go, "What sort of idiot would go? I know. Let's make it really complicated and say, if your brewery is less than 25 square feet or something, you pay a slightly different rate. It's bonkers."
Yeah, there will probably be lots of breweries that are just below the threshold, and that will then hold off expanding, or that will set up some other company and brew somewhere else and call it something else in order to qualify for that lower rate. But otherwise, so far the system is, we have, I think, every alcoholic drink has its own tax, well, not just tax rate, but a totally separate tax structure. So pretty much every type of tax that exists anywhere in the world in the books exists within the British drink sector. There will be some drink that is taxed in this way, another one which is taxed in that way, and they're reducing that. That's that's a good move.
But Mike, Rishi Sunak pointed out, I think I got this right, that alcohol duty was first introduced to help win the English Civil War. I think that, that's past. This was like income tax was introduced to help win the Napoleonic Wars. I mean, I know we don't always get on with the French, but I consider that war to be more or less over.
Yeah, I think so, yeah. It's a bit like the toll on the Forth Road Bridge. I mean, you take it off once the thing's paid for, don't you?
Yeah, no, I suppose that's right.
I guess that's not going to happen soon.
But so you think even on the alcohol side they've screwed up by small breweries or whatever, carve outs for this. I think there's a different treatment for draft beer in pubs compared to beer in bottles.
I just think, and I'm sorry to sound quite so depressing about all of this, but I just think I'm too old now. I remember governments that were a lot more straightforward. You remember what Tony Blair stood for. You might not have liked it, but it was a pretty straightforward way of running the country. Margaret Thatcher knew what she was doing. She knew who to appoint. She knew how to get things done. Even Jim Callaghan is starting to look a bit more, smart.
Statesman-like.
Than these people, because he actually had a plan and he had some quite decent people. I just don't, you look around, there was a guy on the front bench today and I was sitting watching it with a bunch of people at Talk. We couldn't even identify him. I don't know who he was. I mean, we think he might have been working for the Treasury, but he shouldn't have been on the front bench. But he was sitting sort of next to Boris. We go, who is that guy? Nobody knew who he was.
But is this because he was in a full hazmat
suit? But he was wearing a mask. But even so, I could recognise, Dominic Raab. I could see that Rishi Sunak was there. I could see Boris. Nobody knew who this guy was. And they've just got all these grey people. Robert Jenrick today, who's not quite any longer in the government, but was a minister. And you just think these are not very substantial individuals. And I just don't think they're very smart. And I think they don't argue with each other. They just kind of nod and go, OK, is it all right if I come into the cabinet? We say, no, you can't come in. Because you're not clever enough, and also there's only 3 of us now since Matt left. And you go, well, what are you doing exactly? What are you actually doing? What's your job?
All right. Well, I was trying to bring us some cheer about the alcohol side. There was one other bit that I wonder whether they got right, and I didn't
have another drink.
Drown your sorrows. And Kristian, this was around universal credit, and I haven't gone through all the details here. But here's the problem, right? The way, as I understand it, the way that universal credit works, because it's an in-work benefit, not just an out-of-work benefit, but the withdrawal rates as you start to work or dial up your hours or get paid a bit more, the withdrawal of that benefit is so sharp that the incentive to work is pretty low. I think it's sort of 80% or so, somewhere around there, you could lose because you're getting your extra hours paid, so the benefit goes. Now, he says he's bringing in a better taper on this. Is that going to substantially incentivise work, or again, is this more fiddling around? It'll be a different taper for small people compared to tall people or something. Everybody have to get a measuring tape out.
Well, don't give them ideas. But no, so far that's in itself a good move. That means taking on some more hours that will pay more than it did before, and that makes a difference at the margin. But of course, they're counteracting that by also increasing national insurance contributions. So for a lot of people, that's going to eat up that difference.
Yeah, so it's kind of, they always say if you rob Peter to pay Paul, you can be sure of Paul's vote, right? But here is the other thing, and this is your area, Kristian, is on housing. So this is what the Chancellor came up with today. He announced £5 billion to fix cladding problems on worst cases, funded in part by a 4% tax on developers, 11.5 billion quid for building 180,000 affordable homes. That comes in at 64k per house. Another 1.8 billion for a brownfields fund to unlock 1 million new homes. Now, Kristian, you've always been the staunch advocate here that, our failure to build new homes, the failure on the supply side is what's made housing in the UK, particularly in London, but really across the UK, so goddamn expensive compared to, average incomes in each area. Is this the right fix?
No. Clearly not. It couldn't be. I mean, they had their chance. They did announce some planning reforms in a white paper last year, but they've already signaled we're rowing back on that, we're not doing that. And that is the supply side. That is the only thing that could have fixed the housing situation, because that's where the bottleneck is. They can pump all the money in the world into affordable housing schemes, but the bottleneck is really the supply side. And so this is like, it's like a game of musical chairs. So you have 20 people and let's say 17 chairs. Of course, you can reserve some chairs for some people. You can label them affordable chairs. You can give some people the right to sit down first. And yes, somebody's going to benefit, but inevitably it's going to come at the expense of someone else.
Mike, I hate this term, affordable homes. I know what it's aiming at, but what kind of property developer would say, my strategy is to build unaffordable homes? Because he wouldn't sell them, right?
Well, it's one of these buzzwords, isn't it? Affordable homes. Well, it depends on how much money you've got, doesn't it? I mean, it's not affordable if you can't afford it. It's that simple. So, I mean, it's affordable to you, maybe, but maybe it's not affordable to me. And, I mean, also, who's going to build 1 million homes? You see how long it takes them to build these housing estates? I mean, they've been working on it for years and years. There's a place down where I live in Sussex where they literally built one house in about 6 months. Right? And they've got this whole site to build about 55 houses on. They've only built one. I don't know why. But, you know, those presumably are affordable homes. But in the end, we haven't got the infrastructure. We haven't got... What I'm told a lot of building companies do is they build parcels of homes because it avoids them paying more tax. Because I think if you build something like anything larger than 10,000 homes in one place, you get taxed more. So they just do little parcels of 5,000 here, 5,000 there, and they split up the different companies so that if they're building 30,000 in one site, they use 6 companies. So they avoid the tax. And in the end, people build houses to make money. Sure. The developers are there not to help us or to help the government. They're there to make money.
Now, the developers are already doing what the breweries will soon be doing. Staying below.
They've already worked out, because the trouble with big government and regulations is that capitalism gets around it. That's what you do, you know? It's like if you're running any business and
you work out what the rules are.
They work out what the rules are. You get a smart accountant and you go around them. That's been going on for time immemorial. It's never going to change.
Okay, so isn't the nettle we need to grab here on greenfield sites, you know, Mike, that I think I'm right in saying the amount of green designated land in Britain's doubled since 1980. That's quite miraculous, really. So yeah, you might argue that you want to, you know, protect, you know, sites of natural beauty. You probably don't necessarily want to build a Tesco Metro in the middle of Stonehenge or something.
Apparently you can if you have the right lobbying person, because I mean Tesco don't seem to have any problem building a Tesco wherever they want.
I
mean, they haven't tried one in Stonehenge,
but maybe they could get away with it. If they have Matthew Taylor as their procurer, then that would be would be the way in. But do you think we got to grasp this nettle and actually say, look, there's a heck of a lot of, you know, green land around that isn't, you know, a site of natural beauty. We don't need to protect it. Let's bloody well build there in the southeast and around London.
Well, I think it's a lot bigger than that. The problem for our population right now is that it's too big. It's growing out of all proportion to what it used to be. And nobody wants to talk about this. Nobody wants to say there's an awful lot of people who are coming here from other countries who are boosting the size of our population. There are also, generally speaking, more people living longer than they were before. And we haven't taken account of any of this. You know, we haven't said, actually, we need probably about 150 to 200,000 more homes built pretty much every 6 months in order to accommodate all these people. But if they haven't got any money, how are you going to give them a free house? How's that going to work? I mean, it does go back, I'm afraid, in the end to the disappearance of council housing when council houses were sold under the Thatcher scheme. And then the governments coming later never bothered to replace them.
Yeah, but they're still there, right? I mean, just because they're in private hands, they're still part of the housing stock. We didn't bulldoze them.
Well, no, because but you can't live in them if you haven't got any money. You can't buy them because basically the people who bought those council houses now own them. They're no longer council houses. So either we take a view that we have to have more what I would call public housing for people to either rent or to buy, which is affordable. But I'm not really in favour of that either. I mean, there are some people living in Hampstead where I was brought up, where I can't afford to buy a house in Hampstead. But, you know, some scumbags can go and live there because it's free or cheap. You know, it doesn't seem fair.
That doesn't seem fair. Kristian, you've always been the advocate that we've got to bite the bullet on greenfield. All of the plans seem to be, we'll build on brownfield sites. Why isn't that enough?
Well, brownfield redevelopment can be extremely complicated. It's contaminated land often, and sometimes you have brownfield sites that are also in the green belt. So you can't build there either because, even though it's brownfield, that in itself should make it popular to build there. But then someone will say, no, but this is green belt land. You can't build here. I mean, green belt. The whole problem with that designation is that it's not an environmental designation. It's not literally green. It's mostly low-grade agricultural land, or some of it, literally, as I said, brownfield land. So that's where the building should go.
Right. You can't just live anywhere, can you? I mean, you need to live somewhere where you can also then get a job. So if you just put somebody in the middle of nowhere without any transport links, which many of these places are like,
Well, that's my worry, that they'll build 1 million homes on the Orkney and Shetland Islands or something. Not obviously a place where there's a million jobs to make these people productive, right?
Yeah, but the greenbelt land is all around the big cities. It's all around London, Oxford, Cambridge. I think Manchester has a greenbelt. It's all in close to population centres and economic centres as well.
Right.
That should really be doable.
Now, I was talking to Mike earlier about to what extent can we trust government statistics. I'm not necessarily suggesting they're cooking the books, but it's just incredibly difficult to predict what economic growth's going to be in 4 years' time. Kind of fool's errand. But we at the IEA earlier this week released a research paper by our chairman Neil Record called "The Great British Rake-Off," and the concern here that Neil points out is the government is basically not admitting what the full cost of public sector pensions are. His research suggests that we're actually looking at a gap of 57 billion quid a year between, if you like, what appears on the front of the government's books and the actual costs of servicing public sector pensions. That's in broad terms the equivalent of the education budget, just to service public sector pensions. Mike, do you actually think that the state of the finances are a lot worse than we're told? And we've got, they might not be in the budget today. We've got a whole string of liabilities building up, public sector pensions, an ageing population, a good thing, but pension liabilities come with that. Social care hasn't been fixed, carbon net zero. I mean, the costs that you might fall on the taxpayer over the next 10, 20 years seem to me astronomical.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, Peter Hitchens talks about this a lot and says it's all going to get a lot worse. And I sort of am not quite in that camp. I'm not quite convinced that we are heading for a financial disaster and that suddenly there's going to be a huge block of tax that arrives on our front door. But I just think we've reached this kind of Neverland now where people don't, I think, take account of the numbers because the public doesn't understand the size of the numbers. It's almost impossible to understand exactly how much debt we are in. And because borrowing is now still relatively cheap, it's not a problem. The problem comes if we ever have to go back. I mean, inflation's a question we haven't got to yet, but inflation's coming, it looks like. And if inflation suddenly starts hitting people's mortgages and it starts making people's actual pound in their pocket worth less, that's when it's going to hit home. I don't think it's going to be so much that we can't afford to fix the economy, but it will be that people won't be able to afford to pay their mortgages. I mean, I remember what it was like when people had negative equity in their house and they couldn't sell their house and they couldn't pay off their mortgage, and that is what I would say I'm slightly worried about. I think the never land of kind of crazy borrowing is okay because you just kind of take the Boris Johnson approach, which is that, it'll be fine, 10 years, 20, we'll be right. And that's what he thinks. He doesn't really seem to plan for that.
But if inflation does come along and bite us, I think they're predicting, 4%-ish next year, and I don't think you'd need to be a complete prophet of doom to say you could imagine it being a lot higher than that, right? Totally. You could imagine it then interest rates will go up, right? Yeah. But don't you think, Mike, that we've got a bit too used to this sort of zero interest rate world, which is a fantasy land? I mean, I don't. My mortgage is less than my energy bill. It's absolutely mental.
But that's the thing. I mean, people have got so used to spending money they don't have. Partly because that's the society we now live in. Nobody ever thinks about, saving up for anything. Nobody ever thinks. I mean, there was a doctor this week who said, and I don't agree necessarily with the GPs who are all moaning about having to do a job that they signed up to do that pays very well that they somehow can't find time to do because they're too busy, staring into their Zoom screens. But, he said, there is this kind of Amazon Prime mentality now where everybody expects everything to come to them straight away. They don't want to wait for it. They don't care if they can't afford it. You want a Land Rover Defender? Yeah. Well, how much? 58 grand? Yeah. How much do you make? 24? That's fine. Yeah. I'll pay for it over 3 years.
Pay for it on
and people just go, why wouldn't I have a Land Rover Defender? And it's kind of, everybody wants everything all the time. It's like life of the fast lane. And you go, well, that's not really sustainable, is it?
Kristian, what do you make of the state of the finances? I've always been pretty hawkish on this. I accepted COVID was going to mean that it was a period of a higher government spending than normal. Is there anything to worry about here, or was Ronald Reagan right? The deficit's big enough to look after itself.
It certainly is that. No, what's a bit more worrying is that I wouldn't have expected a spending splurge at the end of this crisis, and that's also why the debt ratio isn't forecast to go down. You would that they forecast as ahead for a couple of years, and there isn't much of a detectable downward trend even as the emergency is over. And 20 years ago, in the beginning of the century, we had debt to GDP was something like 40% or less than that. And now we're close to around 100%, and that seems to have become the new normal. I mean, being around 80% used to be normal for a while, and now we're just getting used to that.
Mike, it's been a pleasure having you with us. Thanks for your straightforward, common sense thinking, and make sure you get another glass of rosé in before the price goes up at midnight, my friend.
Absolutely right. I'm sorry if my economic theory was not quite on a par with your own, but
close enough. We're an eclectic mix here at the Institute of Economic Affairs. It's been great having you with us, Mike. And you're on at 6:30 tomorrow morning?
No, Julia's back tomorrow.
Right, Julia's back tomorrow.
So I'm back to normal. So
back to normal. 10 o'clock.
No, we get up till 7.
Right, and you're live on TalkRadio from 10?
From 10.
From 10 tomorrow, so tune in and listen to the Independent Republic of Mike Graham. We're just going to show you now a promotional video from our friends at the University of Buckingham. They are running a distance learning master's course in political economy aimed at graduates with strong interest in the history of economic ideas, the application of economics to public policy. It might be the sort of course that some of our politicians could benefit from going on as well. Here's the clip coming up now.
The University of Buckingham's Vincent Centre, together with the Institute of Economic Affairs, has set up a distance learning MA in Political Economy by Research. We're inviting applications for our autumn start. The programme begins with a series of webinars on leading figures and schools of thought. The work of writers such as Adam Smith, David Ricardo, John Maynard Keynes, Friedrich Hayek will be discussed by leading scholars. We'll also cover systems of thought such as Marxism, Austrian economics, and the Frankfurt School. Towards the end of this sequence, participants on the programme will be asked to prepare presentations on the topic on which they intend to write their dissertations of up to 20,000 words. They'll then be allocated a tutor who will work with them through regular online meetings on Teams or Zoom, when drafts will be discussed and suggestions and advice offered. This programme should particularly appeal to those with an interest in classical liberalism or the history of economic thought. Although many applicants may have studied economics previously, this is not a prerequisite for admission. The programme can be done entirely by distance learning, but you are welcome to use the facilities of the university campus and the Vincent Centre if this is something which you can do and which you wish to do. The programme is sufficiently flexible that you'll be able to complete it either full-time or whilst working. If you're interested, please go to our website for details of the programme. You can also contact the course director, Professor Ben Shackleton.
So moving our attention a little from the fiscal apocalypse in Westminster and London to the challenges of climate change policy. COP26, the Conference of the Parties, begins in Glasgow on Sunday. Clues in the name, it's the 26th time that world leaders have gathered together to try and solve global warming. To celebrate this at the IEA, get this, we actually hosted a meeting, Kristian and I were at it, with a number of Extinction Rebellion activists here in our offices today. I'm not sure how many points of agreement there were between us. We had to agree to differ on a good number of them. We didn't really solve the climate change crisis in our meeting, and if Kristian, myself and Extinction Rebellion can't solve it in an hour, I don't know what the chances are of our world leaders solving it in 2 weeks in Glasgow. Pretty thin, I'd guess. But to help us navigate the way to actually resolving this problem, please give a very warm welcome to my last two guests, Dehenna Davison, the Member of Parliament for Bishop Auckland, and the Head of Environment and Energy at the CPS, Eamonn Ives. Dehenna. Lovely to see you.
Nice to see you.
Eamonn, good to see you. Good to see you. Kristian, I should also say in the break you were pointing out, I think I've got it wrong on rosé wine. That's going down, isn't it? Have you worked this one out, Dehenna? Rosé
wine is going
cheaper.
down.
It's red wine's going up.
Fruity cider's going down, rosé wine going down, white lightning going up, but we're okay with that.
White lightning going up. Not everyone can be a winner. Okay. So it just proves how complicated this alcohol policy is, right? I couldn't work out what's going up and what's going down. Now, Dehenna, let me start with you on this this thorny issue of climate change. So we're often accused, or I'm often accused of being a climate denier. I don't really know what that means.
You believe there isn't a climate?
I believe there is a climate.
Right.
Yeah,
Well, that's reassuring.
I'm pretty sure on that one. But disagreeing about how you might tackle any problem, or indeed what the scale of the problem is, seems to now put you in the climate denier camp. Unless you sign up for absolutely everything in the public policy area. I mean, it seems to me we're not going to be able to have an intelligent conversation about environmental policy and climate change until we accept there is actually an open-ended debate to be had, right?
I'd agree with you, and I think we need to be very open and honest about a large number of these debates, and climate change is one where we really see that so starkly. There seems to have kind of emerged this consensus between pretty much every political party, and that the media kind of peddle, that we're all kind of agreed that climate change is one of the biggest threats facing our nation and facing the world. I think we're all kind of in agreement that we should probably try and do something about this. But actually we need to be a bit realistic, don't we? If we're looking at the fact that China is one of the biggest polluters in the world and they're not even coming to these COP talks, then sure, we can play our part, but without them really stepping up, realistically, is it worth putting a huge cost of living burden on some of our lowest earners? We need to be able to have this debate, and I think it's great that we're doing it on here today.
Yeah, so are you a bit sceptical about this carbon net zero thing then? If the UK in roundabout terms is 1% of global carbon emissions, even assuming, which I think is pretty heroically ambitious, we got that down, we basically get that to zero, 99% of all carbon emissions are still happening. I mean, this would be an impressive act of self-flagellation, but not obviously something that would save the planet, right?
Well, I think that's kind of what COP's about, isn't it? It's about sort of Britain trying to play our part as a world leader in pulling people together so that it's not just us acting on our own to try and sort of tackle some of the issues associated with climate change. It's trying to bring people together to all kind of play our part. As I say, one of the issues is that China won't be attending, Russia won't be attending, and between them, they are some of the biggest polluters.
So what, it's us and Luxembourg, is it? We're going to
a few more than that. A lot of the Gulf states are going actually,
right,
which is going to be really great to kind of hear their commitments. And we are hearing from a lot of nations who are also committing to this sort of net zero agenda. Great if we are all going to play our part, but actually what does that mean? Can we actually achieve this in the timescale we want without it having catastrophic impacts on industry? And my biggest concern is what that is going to do for the cost of living of the regular taxpayer in Bishop Auckland. And I am concerned, we're talking about green levies now at the same time as people's energy bills are going up anyway. It doesn't quite add up to me. So. And
how much did the budget add up to you? I mean, do you think this is going to make the cost of living a lot easier for folk in Bishop Auckland and elsewhere?
In some ways, yeah. I mean, my views on the national insurance rise anyway. I was one of the few Tory rebels on that particular announcement. But actually, you look at what we're doing on universal credit, changing that tapering system to actually make work pay. That's a really good thing, and it's going to put more money back in the pockets of some of the hardest working but lowest earners. I think that's fundamentally a really good thing. You look at the national minimum wage, which I know I'm sure we could have a very intense debate on whether having one is kind of the right thing or not, but certainly that is going to help the cost of living for some of those lowest earners. So,
assuming they keep their jobs.
Well, very, very true. The jobs figures are looking pretty good at the moment. We had the ONS kind of revisions on the jobs figures today, which actually looked like unemployment. They thought it would peak at 12%. They're now saying we'll peak at somewhere between, I think, 4 and 5%, which is much, much stronger than we were expecting given the sort of scale of the pandemic and the impact that's had on our economy. I think realistically the budget was kind of less difficult than we might have been expecting in some ways. The universal credit taper, I think, is genuinely one of the best things that came out of the budget. But also this emphasis on research and development and science spending as well. Because, if we can really prove that we are this sort of tech science superpower, that's not only going to help kind of put Britain even more kind of on the world stage as being that, but also all these technologies that we can be developing in Britain, that makes us money. That's money going into the exchequer.
And this is what we need, economic growth, right?
Absolutely, we've got to go for growth first.
This is what we need. Now, Eamonn, you help me. This is your meat and drink at the Centre for Policy Studies. I was confessing earlier that I found Rishi Sunak's, he was on his feet for best part of an hour, a bit boring. How am I not going to be bored to death by 2 weeks of COP26? What's actually going to happen that's going to be significant? Excite me about it.
Well, I'll do my best.
Yeah, do your very best.
I'm not sure how successful I'll be in that endeavour, but yeah, so it's going to be 2 weeks of sort of everybody coming together, diplomats, negotiators, journalists, people from NGOs, some think tankers. I'm not going myself though, unfortunately, due to the exorbitant hotel costs. Maybe we could have had a bit of work on that in the budget, but yeah, so and sort of all coming together to announce sort of emissions cuts that these countries are signing up to. The UK's obviously got its one. And so yeah, this is sort of the first properly kind of big COP since Paris, which was in 2015, where we obviously signed up to the Paris Agreement with an ambition to limit temperature rise to 1.5 degrees or within 2 degrees. And yeah, people will be announcing their commitments to try and get and keep within.
Right, but help me with this. Is this actually a kind of deliberative process, you know, a kind of high summit meeting where we thrash it all out? Or is this just a jamboree of, you know, well-placed announcements to the media, a bit like Tory party conference?
I was going to draw that parallel. I think there's a bit of both, really, isn't there? But I do think that, you know, there are negotiations going on, and it is a chance for people to, and countries and their diplomats to kind of, you know, maybe egg each other on is a bit of the wrong word, but doing a little bit of that. But, you know, a lot of countries already have announced their sort of plans and NDCs, nationally determined contributions, as they're known, for limiting emissions. But yeah, I'm sure there's still some countries which are yet to do that, and they still need a little bit of a push over the line to do the maximum ambition.
Kristian, you were in with me with our tea and cakes gathering and organic milk or whatever we gave them for Extinction Rebellion. I was sat there with my can of Coca-Cola. What do you make of the green movement and where they're coming from? How many points of agreement did you find around the table between you and them?
I'd say close to zero. I mean, yes, as you said, we
net zero.
We don't dispute that there is a climate and that we have some impact on it. But one thing that was interesting was, I mean, we disagreed on pretty much everything, unsurprisingly, but where we particularly disagreed is that whenever we were saying there are some things that are actually not that bad, where things are moving in a positive direction, including from your perspective, that we already have a trend of falling carbon emissions and have had for quite a while, they weren't accepting that. And I think the problem here is that for too many people, climate alarmism, environmental alarmism has become a way of life. And that's why whatever they're announcing or deciding at this COP summit, those groups, Extinction Rebellion, the Greta Thunberg fans, Greenpeace, Friends of the Earth and so on, they're always going to say, this is all just blah blah, you're doing nothing, it's not nearly enough. And there's pretty much nothing you could do that would make these people say, right, that's fine, we've won. We go home now.
Yeah. Dehenna, that's sort of the problem in this debate, isn't it? I mean, I actually put to the XR guys and gals that we were speaking to, I said, I think I've got this right, I said to them that XR's policy is carbon net zero by 2025, the government's by 2050. I said, is there anything at all that you would consider to be over-egging the pudding? If somebody came to you and said, 2025? Not good enough. Net zero, not good enough. We need to be net minus 20% by 2024. Would you say, no, that's a bit hysterical now? You know, that's overdoing it. We don't need to move that fast. And they sort of said, no, that would be an interesting contribution to the debate. So it's sort of kind of carbon, you know, negative net minus 20% or whatever by next Thursday.
Please don't give people ideas here, Mark.
Well, exactly. Well, I might have seeded some ideas. Do you think we're just looking at this problem in the wrong way? I'm not saying there isn't a problem with emissions and greenhouse gases, there is, but we do seem to have become kind of doomsayers about it, kind of apocalyptic about it, rather than thinking, yeah, we're going to have to solve this technologically over a period of time, right?
Well, I think Kristian was right. You said climate alarmism, and I think that is kind of one of the key things that we're seeing, particularly from groups like Extinction Rebellion. But, you know, I think even to some extent, the way in which kind of climate change is taught in schools, it's taught in such a way that actually terrifies kids. I mean, I remember it, and I'm like way off school years now, but I still remember geography lessons and basically being told the world's going to start burning, be worried, tell your parents to turn off the lights when they go to bed kind of thing. Thinking, oh my goodness, this is so scary, I must do something about this. And it's no wonder that we have this kind of huge band of young activists who actually really want to get involved in this and think that this is one of the biggest issues that we need to solve. And I think that's part of the problem with the political consensus, isn't it? There's always this talk about how do we win the young vote. And there is such a view that the way to win the young vote is by talking about climate change. But I think you're right, Mark. I think we need to look at the actual successes that we've had and look at them in the context of something that actually hasn't had a massively detrimental impact on people's way of lives and on our economy, which I think rushing towards targets in a kind of blind way, we may well start to see the impact of that. So I think we need to be very, very sensible. But it has to be economy and kind of cost of living and people's way of life first.
Eamonn, help me with this. What's the way that a free marketeer, charts their way through this sort of issue? I mean, is carbon net zero by 2050 and remotely sensible or achievable? And if it is or it isn't, what should a free market, liberal, capitalist type person be in favour of to tackle this problem?
So net zero by 2050 was kind of the culmination of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change's report that basically, we need to kind of aim towards. And I think it's kind of useful to have those, dates set as kind of points for us all to sort of work towards. I think you do need to have a little bit of arbitrariness in politics, and sometimes picking dates like that can be helpful. Not always, of course, but I think sort of for things like this, it seemed like an okay way to proceed, I think. But to your point about sort of what a classical liberal can do, and you and I and Kristian and lots of people in this room, I'm sure, are very kind of quite aligned on this. I think there is a lot that sort of classical liberals can bring to the debate. So whether that's kind of around better regulation and things like that, I'm sure you kind of know about gene editing and maybe things around sort of like synthetic meat and things like that are actually currently extremely heavily regulated by virtue of our membership of the European Union, largely, previous membership.
I'm pretty sure somebody's told me that's over now, isn't that right? We've ended our membership of the European Union. I read it somewhere, I think.
We talked about referendums before, and but no, so I think things like that we should absolutely be moving ahead on. And we talked about kind of Britain only accounting for 1% of global emissions, and that is true. But I think we can actually, we can make a dent in that 1%, but we can also kind of provide the technologies and the scientific advancements that actually let the whole world kind of decarbonise by exporting it or giving the world the technology. So I think that's a more positive and optimistic way to think about things, which hopefully you and I and people in this room can kind of get behind.
Dehenna, my slight problem here when I try to talk to people, not necessarily like these Extinction Rebellion activists, but just folk who are concerned about the environment and potentially some of them terrified about the environment, is they don't seem to embrace any of the obvious solutions, like the sort of things that Eamonn has laid out there, that, if we had more synthetic meat, then we wouldn't need to breed as many animals. I mean, a case could be made, I guess, for small modular nuclear reactors. Absolutely. A case could be made to start fracking again. But none of these potential solutions seem ever to be embraced by the environmental movement. Is that a fair criticism? And if so, is Kristian right that this is kind of, you might say this is something of a cult, that what they want is apocalyptic alarmism, a criticism might be, rather than actually saying, well, with a bit of nuclear here, with a bit of deregulation of tech there, with a bit of fracking over here and a tweak here and a tweak there, we can get it. I mean, that's been one of my frustrations, that solutions don't seem to be particularly attractive to...
Well, I think particularly on the sort of nuclear modular reactors, some of the R&D work going into those is absolutely incredible, by companies like Rolls-Royce. We've discussed this so much on the kind of show I do on Sundays with Nigel Farage, who is a massive fan of the small modular nuclear reactor.
Right.
And I think you're right, there are these solutions available, but, even if they're not, they're not perhaps the greenest, perhaps we can find better ways in the future once the technology is there. But if it isn't, why not get these head starts? Why not start using more nuclear? Why not look at fracking? Why not look at some of these other solutions? And as you say, I mean, the synthetic meat is an absolute no-brainer, isn't it, frankly, to try and just make a dent, make a small contribution towards actually getting there. But you're right, these sort of climate alarmists won't accept that. It's kind of an all or nothing, which I think, in a way, actually puts off a lot of regular people from getting behind their cause in the first place. They see Insulate Britain protesters, they see the Extinction Rebellion gang in their masks and their odd kind of cult-style gowns marching and blocking off roads for regular people. How is that going to win round a kind of normal, sane, sound-minded person? It's absolutely not. And so you would hope that they'd actually want to come to the table in a much more grown-up way. And I'm really surprised they engaged with you, actually, to sit down and have that conversation. I'm pleased that they did. But, as Kristian said, it didn't
They're
seem
still
like
glued to the chairs upstairs.
I can believe it, yeah. But sadly, it doesn't sound like you came to any kind of sort of sound conclusions or obvious agreement from it, unfortunately.
Yeah, no, I think I'm fair there. I should say they were extremely polite, and I think on both sides we were a bit worried that they were a bit worried we were going to have a gotcha thing at them. We were a bit worried they were going to have a gotcha thing at us.
One of the best questions, though, Mark, is to ask these protesters how they got to the protest. that's always quite a fun one.
Right, yeah.
Always quite good.
In their Ferrari or something.
Yeah. It was when Emma Thompson flew over to attend a climate change protest in London from LA. That was quite a fun one.
Kristian, do you think it's possible to have an intelligent discussion about this, or are there so many areas of like free market IEA concern where an interesting debate might happen in this room, but the National Health Service and the future of it, the environment and what we sensibly do about climate change, whether taxation should be cut, the scale of the debt and the deficit are just, we're actually just going to shout at, in most public discourse, it's just going to be a shouting match rather than an intelligent discourse. And if that's true, think tanks got a really bloody big problem, right?
Well, it depends on who you're talking to. I mean, the purpose of today's meeting wasn't, we weren't expecting that halfway through the meeting they would suddenly say, oh, actually, you make some good points. We're free marketeers now. Here's a donation to the IEA.
Yeah, I was disappointed. I thought my argument was pretty damn compelling. I was hoping that they were all going to walk out as Hayekians.
Somehow didn't happen. But there is always there's always a middle ground who watchers and people who try to make up their minds. And I think if you had, let's say they wanted to come on our podcast, might still happen. I think if somebody who is a bit on the fence listens to that and sees, okay, we have cost-effective solutions here where we're not deniers, we just want to make stuff cost-effective and efficient and rational, and you have people who are clearly not prepared to talk about rational solutions, who are, let's say, going back to this case, also anti-nuclear, anti-fracking, anti-everything that could work, then if I was a bit on the fence and if I would see that kind of contrast, then I would say, no, the free marketeers got it right here.
Let me come back to you, because the other suggestion I put to them, just as a kind of straight policy tool, wouldn't this just crack it? And I know not all free marketeers are taken by this at all. I'm accused by my own side of being a bit state interventionist, but why don't we just have a straightforward carbon tax, right? This is a very simple economic issue of externalities that are not properly priced in the market mechanism. We put a price on carbon. Yeah, you can argue about what it should be. And you dial up that price if you think things are going awry and carbon emissions are too high and we've got to hit it by 2030 or 2040 rather than 2050. And you ease off the price if things are actually going better than expected. And, actually, lo and behold, the world isn't underwater yet. So you sort of dial it in sort of the same way that the Bank of England's supposed to adjust interest rates to deal with inflation. And you just turn that dial. And the argument can be how much you turn the dial. And, that would be an ongoing debate, but just having that dial, that one golf club in your golf set, isn't that all that's needed?
I think that would go a long, long way to sorting out the problem where we are at the moment, and it's certainly something we've pulled through a lot at the Centre for Policy Studies, including quite recently a paper I wrote myself. I think basically if we could align much more of our decarbonisation agenda along a sort of carbon pricing mechanism, then we would be in a far, far better place. I mean, we do already have a lot of carbon taxes in various different ways.
Yeah, but they're higgledy-piggledy, right?
And they can be large or they can be small, and they can even be effective subsidies when you're looking at VAT rates on energy and things like that. If we could have a proper carbon price, and maybe you can push that with your colleagues in the House, maybe not. But I think that would go a long, long way. And I think the absolute best thing is, right, net zero is not going to go away. You might not like it, but it's going to stay here. So it's not a question of net zero or no, not net zero. It's a question of how we get there.
Do you think that's right, or do you think we're going to have this referendum?
We're not going to have a referendum. Right, I think if we did, it would not go the way that I think.
I'm not even quite sure what the question would be.
I've not read the newspaper report myself, but I don't think it's for the birds to even consider. Most people voted for it. We voted for it at the 2019 election. Every single party, I think, had a net zero commitment. That's by the by. I don't want to get drawn onto that, but I think carbon pricing I will get drawn onto, and I think the more we can have of that, the better.
Dehenna, let me finish with you, because I'm not having a pot particularly at the Conservatives here. It seems to apply to all the political parties who you say there's this consensus around net zero, but then suddenly you get all these sort of strange carve-outs and exceptions and exemptions, right? The changes to air passenger duty today. So hurrah, it will be easier to fly between Glasgow and London or Manchester and Belfast. Well, that's great if you're in favour of air travel, but goes kind of against the grain of carbon emissions. The government's having to pay millions of pounds to businesses to produce CO2, in a great irony, despite our effort to cut emissions, because of the shortage of CO2 is putting the food industry at risk. The Labour Party's argued for the temporary suspension of the VAT rate on domestic fuel. Well, again, you can see that's the case if you're worried about fuel poverty, but if your overarching strategy is to cut emissions, you can't sort of say, well, that's our overarching strategy, but in each individual policy area, we're not going to follow through with it. We're going to have cheaper flights, cheaper fuel over Christmas, subsidise this, bail out that. There doesn't seem any party, even though they're all committed to net zero, actually has a consistent policy agenda that backs it up right the way through the chain. Is that a fair criticism?
I'm not sure it's a criticism, actually. I wouldn't take it as one. I'd say actually a government isn't there to do one particular thing. A government is there to govern everyone, to try and look after everyone and give people the tools to get on in their own lives. If you want to vote for a real kind of net zero pioneering party, vote for the Green Party. If you want a party where greenness is at the very heart of their agenda, vote for the Green Party. But otherwise, of course, we've got to look at other things. You know, of course, we've got to look at, as I've said, cost of living, which is a huge one. And actually, look at the State of the Union, which is the very reason for the air passenger duty being reduced for domestic flights, which I think is fundamentally a really, really good thing. But I get your point. It's difficult when we're really trying to big up our green credentials to then have some of these kind of exemptions or these things that don't quite fit into that. But I think it's a great thing because I think it shows that we're a government that actually cares about, you know, more than one policy agenda, which I think is very important.
And where are you on the referendum question? Or was one referendum in your political career enough?
One has been quite enough. Well, two, technically, if you count the Scottish one as well. Yeah. No, I mean, I just think it'd be daft. And I think realistically, most people, depending on what the question was, because we know that is very important and what the options are, I think most people would probably vote to go with net zero anyway, which would be, difficult for those of us who are a bit more sceptical.
Kristian, Dehenna, Eamonn, been great to have you with us. I promised at the outset we had an hour to sort out the fiscal crisis and to sort out the climate change crisis, and we've done it, lo and behold, pretty much bang on the money within an hour. So thanks very much to my guests still with me now. Thanks to Mike Graham, who joined us earlier. Thanks to all of you at home for watching. We'll be back in 2 weeks' time. If you've enjoyed the show, please hit the like button. Make sure you hit the subscription bell and the notification bell. That way you'll be kept up to date with all of the stuff coming out on the IEA London digital channel. If you have got a few pounds to spare because you're a beer drinker and it's 3p less a pint, I think, as of midnight tonight, it's going to save me an absolute fortune over the next year or two, then why not become an IEA online patron? Details of that are below, and that will trigger an invite to join us live here, not just for Live at Littlewood, but for the post-match chat and discussion and a drink as well. And my particular thanks to our top tier IEA online patrons, Donal Blaney, Eric Keane, James Burns, Mark Edwards, Philip Osoof, Richard Leader, Robert Appleby, Timothy Worrell and Costa Manis. Really grateful to your support. Why not join them if you've got a few pounds spare? That's all from Live with Littlewood for this evening's episode. Stay safe, stay free. Over and out. Well, if you enjoyed that conversation, why not watch one of these other videos? And while you're here, remember to hit the subscribe button and the notification bell. That way, you'll never miss out on a single IEA broadcast.